at this point also there's a bit of abstract introduction. So you're no longer just using objects. You can now talk about 1 + 1 coming from the mind and not having a pen, as we talked about it at concrete level for kindergarten. Grade 1 to 3, what are they learning at this level? Welcome back to Elimu Cafe, and I'm Teacher Leah. And on this episode, we're going to now dive deeper into what happens in grade 1 to grade 3, which is the next stage right after kindergarten. In our previous episode, we talked about the foundational stage, which was PP1 and PP2, and we discussed in depth what the children are learning in the different learning areas. Now, at this stage, you probably, if you have a child already, or if who has gone through this stage, most schools will offer what we call a kindergarten graduation, and now your child has gone to grade 1. Now, at grade 1, the child is expected to be 6 years old by January 31st of that year, as is suggested by policy. Now, at CBE level, this child is now in primary school, what we call primary school. They're no longer in kindergarten or pre-primary, and now they're in grade 1, or previously what was called standard 1. So the learning areas at this stage are also building up on the foundations that were built from PP1 and PP2. So here you're introducing gently, especially at grade 1, structured learning. So at PP1 and PP2, there was a lot of, as I said, it was very chilled out. It's supposed to be a bit of an introduction, and it's not supposed to be as complicated as it becomes, and it becomes slightly more complicated in terms of structure for grade 1. And at this level, actually, the learning areas also increase, and you're going to look at these learning areas. The first learning area is literacy. Literacy at this point is what we call English. They actually call it literacy English, and that is another interesting bit that is introduced at grade 1. Now Kiswahili becomes a subject on its own. In pre-primary, it's not really segmented. The teacher can teach it or not. A different language that can be taught or not. So if the child is learning, for example, in Kiswahili, they can learn English at certain points, or it's just intermingled in it. But in grade 1 now, the child learns both English and Kiswahili. Now, literacy at this level, which is the first or the core learning area, it's a mandatory subject, is now discussing or looking into simple texts. So remember, now they've learned how to identify sounds. They've learned how to blend these sounds. Now they start blending the sounds to make sentences, simple sentences. They start constructing sentences. They start writing more through grammar and writing. This is a point where the teacher will give them simple stories to be able to understand, were they able to learn what, or were they able to understand what the story was about. Like, for example, the story of the Little Red Riding Hood. They listen, sometimes they read, depending on the level at which they are at. And at this point, they build their literacy in that level. Now, in Kiswahili, of course, again, Kiswahili at this point is now, it can be Kiswahili or the Kenyan Sign Language for learners with hearing impairment. So at this point, it's basic listening and speaking, again, reading the basic text, writing short sentences, understanding common vocabulary. And you will notice here that the Kiswahili teacher really emphasizes on certain points where, for example, in English, we talk about it, the vowels is A, E, I, O, A. And in Kiswahili, we talk about it as A, E, I, O, U, because the U in Kiswahili is U, but in English, it's an A. So at this point, you're trying to explain to the child the differences in how to read Kiswahili versus English, and also just to make also Kiswahili sound interesting. Then we go to numbers. For numbers, the numbers and operations now move slightly upwards. The children are supposed to learn up to 1,000 from grade 1 to grade 3, of course, at different varying points. So each grade has its own expectation, but the numbers will vary up to 1,000 at this point. Then, of course, we have the basic addition, now a bit more sophisticated than what was taught in kindergarten. Here you can find now adding or subtracting with carry. Remember, like you're having 9 + 1, so the child understands how to carry, things like that. And at this point also, there's a bit of abstract introduction. So you're no longer just using objects. You can now talk about 1 + 1 coming from the mind and not having a pen, as we talked about it at concrete level for kindergarten. So here we talk about basic addition, we talk about patterns, we look at money, we look at measurements, we look at problem solving with real life context. So one of these things is like Mary has 5 oranges. He gives Brian 2 oranges. How many oranges does Mary have left? Those are some of the basic real-life problems, or what we call word problems, that are introduced at this level. And as I said, different sophistication as the child goes from grade 1 up to grade 3. Then the other learning area that is here is called environmental activities, also which was covered in pre-primary 1 and pre-primary 2. Here now you talk about still reintroduce family and community, the weather, the plants, the animals. And here we also introduce simple geography now, and also environmental care at a more sophisticated level than was being introduced or being taught at foundation level, which is PP1 and PP2. Then of course we go into CRE, IRE, and HRE, which is Hindu. So those are the 3 religious education segments that are offered in CBE. Here again, we look at values. We talk about stories from religious contexts. Here is when children, for example, for me as a Christian, we will discuss maybe the story of Jesus. For a Muslim, we'll discuss the story of Muhammad and things like that. And so we talk about basic religious practices. What are the stance? What are the prayer stance when you're praying? How you're supposed to put your hands together? When are you supposed to pray? And things like that. And of course, here you also talk about moral decision making. Moral decision making is where you give children scenarios. Someone has stolen your pen. What are you supposed to do? You've collected money on the road. What are you supposed to do? Basic moral decisions of day-to-day incidences in their life. And then in this stage also, there's something called hygiene and nutrition. So hygiene and nutrition is another core subject that is introduced at what we call grade 1 to grade 3, or elementary level, as I prefer calling it. And here the children introduced to hand washing, healthy and unhealthy habits, safety in the kitchen and at home, basic anatomy and hygiene routines. And for the children who are doing their current grade 3 assessment, as I was shooting this video, they are currently working on the different types of foods. So it actually just gets into it a bit more, to be able to understand what do we eat, what are the different categories of foods like carbohydrates, proteins, vitamins, and how do they help us in our growth. And of course, as I said, basic hygiene, like how to brush your teeth now at a more sophisticated level, how to wash your hands, the steps of washing your hands. And now this child can also be able to demonstrate it more, communicate it better than they would have at foundation stage. So the other learning area that is taught at elementary level is movement and physical activities. Again, this is still PE, games, athletics, gymnastics, body coordination and balance, the basic rules of fair play and teamwork. And this is important. And I usually say this is just my opinion, and also just the opinion of very many education or early childhood theorists, that at this point is when you introduce what we call team sports. At PP1 and PP2, it's not really important. The children are very egocentric. They think for them, they want to think about themselves. But at this level now, the child is a bit more calm, and we shall talk about it more when you talk about the theories. And so introducing team sports at this level is very encouraged. And so they start learning about fair play. You're supposed to be 10 in a team. For example, if it's football, you're supposed to be 11. If it's basketball, you're supposed to be 5, and things like that. So this is what happens at grade 1 to 3 level. And then we have art and craft. Now it's called creative activities because it brings in drawing, painting, modeling, crafts, as I said, expressing yourself, music. In the new curriculum, most of them have been enmeshed into one. And here we talk about singing, clapping, playing simple instruments, composing simple tunes, cultural and religious songs, learning the national anthem. All these things are now at elementary level. And then there's this discussion on the indigenous languages. It is optional but very encouraged. It promotes cultural diversity and it enhances just a cognitive flexibility as well. And on top of that, it helps with multilingual development. And I think that it also gives children an opportunity to learn different cultures. Like, for example, if a child is based in, for example, in a different location from where they were born, they can learn simple greetings from that community. Like I would love to learn, like for example, where I teach in Kilifi, I know how to say greetings. And that child, maybe I'm not from the Giriama community, but I know how to say greetings. And that in a way really just promotes cultural diversity. It enables us to be tolerant of each other. And so as much as it's not a compulsory subject, it's really encouraged for schools to introduce this as a learning area. And the policy says that at this level, it should be the language of that catchment area. So really it's supposed to be also a very easy breezy introduction to different cultures, and it can be done according to whichever culture is of that particular area that your child is growing up in. Now, those are the basic learning areas in elementary. At this level, of course, as I said, it's not really, it's just building up. So imagine it as a house. The child now is at level, you've done your foundation and now you're bringing up the umekoroga base, you know, and now you're coming up. Now you're coming up pole pole. You're still trying to find where the windows will be. You're trying, as per the plan, maybe the windows should be here, the door should be here. So you're just coming up slowly. And a lot of the work that has been introduced at foundation level is actually just repeated on the basis of known to unknown, so that some children who might not have gotten an opportunity to really understand the foundation, it's still reintroduced at this level, at grade 1 to grade 3. And that really just covers everything that there is on the elementary level. I hope you've been able to understand the differences between the foundation level and this level of what we call elementary. On top of that, there is a registration that happens at this level. It's called the NEMIS and the NEC assessments also. So the child is expected to be registered into the Kenyan system for identification, also for future assessments. At grade 3 also, there's a lot of assessments that begin happening. For the formative assessment, the child is taken through a lot of practical work, a lot of reading and writing work. Of course, that is paperwork or what we call summative assessments. And all this will begin to culminate into what we call formative assessment that will be used to grade them at the end of their 6 years in primary school. So thank you so much once again for watching. And in our next episode, we are going to look at upper primary. I look forward to seeing you, and bye.